Today's teaching is the result of a special request, actually. And it's a very appropriate teaching for this time, as my guru is here, my root teacher is here, Gyaltsen Rinpoche. And to borrow a phrase from a friend of mine, when Rinpoche is here, I tend to wax eloquent. And so the teaching that I would like to give today is on Guru Yoga. But the way that I would like to do it is from a non-traditional point of view. Actually, it is my tradition to teach you what I've learned or what I've observed through my own practice or through my own experience. And although that is very limited, and I'm the first one to admit that, still I feel that's all I really have to give you. So I would like to continue with that and try to give you my digested experience about Guru Yoga. So it's already digested, pre-chewed, ready to use. Don't have to do too much with it. Maybe just listen. The most extraordinary thing about meeting one's teacher is that it produces result that no other experience in one's life could possibly produce. During the course of our lives, we have many different kinds of experience. These experiences seem to happen in a very natural and matter-of-fact way. These experiences seem to happen almost in a chaotic way, and it seems to be that we don't understand exactly what the root of our experience is. Yet, according to the Buddha's teachings, these experiences arise in a very exacting way, and they arise through cause and effect relationships that continue and build on one another. Some cause, and it may be something as subtle as one's own perception, will bring about some effect. That effect will act as a future cause and will bring about more effect. And that effect will again act as a cause. And it's almost like the effect that one has when one throws a pebble into a pond. It isn't even a linear progression. It's a continual explosion of cause and effect relationships. And although because of that explosive quality, they seem to be chaotic, in fact, they are very exacting. We, however, have no capacity to understand cause and effect relationship, and so we must rely on the perception of the Buddha to teach us this fact. We have a very limited perception. Our perception is very limited by our location and our inability to perceive anything beyond that which the five senses can display to us. Furthermore, even if our perception began at the time of birth, which is not the case for most of us, that perception did begin at the time of birth and really only extends as long as one's natural lifetime extends. Yet the Buddha's perception extends much further than that. In fact, the Buddha's perception extends throughout the three times, all past, present, and all future. Due to the Buddha's omniscience, he is able to see much further than we are. The Buddha's omniscience is due to his enlightenment. He is fully awakened and fully able to be aware and awake in a very natural and uncontrived way, unlimited by circumstance, unlimited by egocentric perception, unlimited by any kind of contrivance of the senses. He is able to be simply and naturally aware, awake. We are not able to do that. We rely on the five senses and we rely on perception that is relative to self. That process of perception which is relative to self, that's all we get to see. So we really have very little understanding of what our experience actually consists of. If we could see more deeply, however, perhaps we would be able to see a continuum of experience that arises in a very exacting way, effect coming from cause, coming from effect, coming from cause, coming from cause, and stretching out into a time that is inconceivable. Almost beginningless time. That's the phrase that's used sometimes in the teaching. Beginningless time. But that each and every circumstance that we experience does arise from some cause. Every cause that we have ever experienced and every effect so far, we can absolutely be certain have arisen within cyclic existence and have had only the qualities and only the capacity of cyclic existence, and because of that will only result in the continuation in cyclic existence. Every experience that we have arises out of the soup of experience that we have had before. Everything that we see, touch, feel, smell, or even know arises from thoughts, perceptions, and activities that we have experienced within the continuum that stretches out in back of us. So that you could say that every single piece of experience that we're having now arises from within this continuum. This being the case, it can only have the qualities of what it has arisen from. In the same way that you can't get a banana from an apple tree, in the same way that you can't get chicken from a cow or pork from a chicken, in that same way, we can only expect the result that directly relates to the effect and the cause that have preceded it. If that's the case, then everything we have experienced so far has been an extension of our own ego. How do we know that that's true? Because we still experience the ego. And because we are still experiencing death and rebirth, the cycle of death and rebirth, cyclic existence. Because we still experience a mixture of happiness and sadness, because we still experience old age, sickness, and death, because we still experience the temporary joys and ultimately the disappointments and sufferings that have to do with the cycle of death and rebirth. And because this is so, we can tell just from that what the cause and effect relationships are that have brought us to this place. As the children have taught us, it is not appropriate, it is not natural, it is not intelligent to assume that somehow miraculously the ordinary things that we have engaged in, the ordinary perceptions that we have engaged in, the ordinary cycle of death and rebirth, that continuum of experience, the ordinary perception of ego as being real and solid, and the ordinary reaction to one's environment, it is not natural to think that these things will somehow produce ultimate happiness. It is not natural to think that somehow these will produce the end of suffering. And it certainly is not natural to think that these things will produce enlightenment. If we continue to revolve in this kind of activity without taking any action, without looking toward that which arises from enlightenment, we will continue as we are. The preciousness of one's teacher, however, is understood in this way. The teacher, if the teacher, of course, is a pure Dharma teacher, brings to us the path of enlightenment. The teacher brings to us the Buddha's teaching. Bringing to us the Buddha's teaching, the teacher must be understood as an extension of the Buddha's miraculous compassion. That is how one should see the teacher. One should understand what that is. One should, in fact, see the teacher as a function rather than an ordinary person. And to see that when one views the teacher, if the teacher is a pure Dharma teacher and teaching in a pure way, without concern for self and with compassion for others, and teaching the Buddha's path, we should see that teacher as providing a function that can be provided no other way. We should see that teacher as an activity that is intimately connected with the Buddha's great compassion. In understanding the value of the Buddha's teaching, we must understand where the Buddha's teaching has come from. Naturally, the Buddha's teaching has come from the Buddha. What makes that precious to us is that the Buddha has achieved enlightenment. The Buddha is not revolving endlessly within the cycle of death and rebirth. The Buddha is not simply a man who considers himself from an egocentric point of view and is a teacher for some reason. The Buddha has attained the state beyond suffering and is completely liberated from all cause and effect relationships that bring about the causes of suffering, or that are the causes of suffering. When describing himself, the Buddha said simply, "I am awake." Awake to the innate nature that is our nature. Fully awake to that uncontrived view. That view which is free of limitation, free of conceptualization, free of fixation on the ego. The Buddha is awake. The Buddha has crossed the ocean of suffering, that is to say, he has finished with all of the cause and effect relationships that continue within the experience of ordinary sentient beings. He has purified all of that. And his mind is stable and remains in a stable way naturally, in a very spacious and stable way, awake and free of limitation. Able to taste that pristine nature, able to experience that kind of spaciousness. The Buddha no longer gives birth to the cause and effect relationships that bring about the continuation of ordinary experience. So when we hear the Buddha's teaching, we are hearing the teaching of someone who began just like us, who began as an ordinary sentient being and completed through purification, through practice, through generosity, through meritorious activity, through meditation, through correct action, through all of the things that we employ on the path, purified all ordinary perception, and like washing mud and dirt off of a crystal, was able to taste and abide spontaneously in the natural state. What the Buddha teaches, therefore, comes from that tree, must be considered like fruit that comes from that tree. The fruit, therefore, is like the tree, not different from the tree. If the tree arises from the seed of enlightenment, then it will most certainly produce enlightenment. On the other hand, if we were to listen to the teachings of an ordinary teacher who simply had a bunch of grand ideas, or who simply felt that they had had an experience and had not themselves attained enlightenment, then we would find ourselves eating that fruit. Are we certain that's what we wish to do? Do we wish to simply have a theory? Do we wish to simply have an idea? Do we wish to simply have an experience? I think if we carefully consider, we will understand that what we really want is to achieve the ultimate goal, the goal of enlightenment, that which is unsurpassed by anything else. And so for that reason, we must go to the source of enlightenment, to those that have achieved supreme realization, proven through seeing the extent of their miraculous activity, and their miraculous ability to produce again and again and again enlightenment in others. The activity of the Buddha is proven in that way. Many who have followed the Buddhist path have achieved enlightenment with miraculous signs to prove that they have done so, signs that cannot be produced through any ordinary means. So the source is most excellent, most pure, most beyond what is ordinary and human. The method, therefore, must be most extraordinary, most excellent, and completely beyond what can be called human, what can be called part of the experience of sentient beings. And the result, therefore, will also be extraordinary and beyond the ken of ordinary sentient beings. It will be the supreme result, that of enlightenment. But the Buddha, the historical Buddha that is, Shakyamuni Buddha, doesn't seem to be here. I mean, I see those that wear his garments. I see those that teach his teachings. How am I to understand what to do if the Buddha is not here? First of all, the Buddha has left the path. The path is pure. It is unchanged. No one has compromised the path. It has been kept very purely. And the teaching now is being taught in its pure form by pure Dharma teachers who have accomplished the path well enough to be able to transmit the teaching and the blessing of the teaching as well. In that regard, when we've come to a point in our lives when we have met a pure Dharma teacher who can transmit to us the path, who can give us appropriate empowerment, commentary, and transmission, who can communicate with us in such a way that it is understandable and that it touches our hearts, who somehow fits into our particular modality, who somehow is able to effectively touch us in some miraculous way, and yet still give us the teaching, still secure for us the opportunity to practice, so that we too can practice this pure path which has arisen from the Buddha's teaching. We have to understand that opportunity, and we have to understand that teacher who can give that to us as being like the door to everything. It is not the same as ordinary experience. We can do lots of things. We can eat, drink, and be merry. We can wear lots of clothes. We can buy lots of stuff. We can climb mountains. We can conquer things. We can do all kinds of things. In our way, we can even make an impact on the world. We can change the world. We're in America. We can do anything. That's what we've been told. but the one thing that we cannot do on our own. Because the cause and effect relationships that we are revolving in do not arise from enlightenment, we cannot produce enlightenment on our own. It is not to say that we do not have that innate nature within us. It is not to say that we do not have within us the Buddha seed, that seed of enlightenment. According to the Buddha's teaching, each and one of us has that potential. But to ripen that potential, to bring forth the essential awakening, to produce the ultimate result, we must have the teaching. Observe for yourself. Left alone, although we have this potential, our habitual tendency has become too strong. We have been revolving in cause and effect relationships and ordinary perceptions since time out of mind, and we will continue to do so. What do you do when you leave here? You continue as you continue. You do things which bring you some result, which bring more things that you think about, which bring more results. And the continuum simply continues. It always does. Endlessly. And even if we decide that here we're going to do something about ourselves, we're going to achieve some meritorious activity, we're going to be spiritual, we're going to take a stand, we're going to get ourselves together. And don't we always decide to do that in some spiritual teaching? The moment we leave the place of that teaching, we continue in our habitual way. Use that as evidence and see for yourself. Since that has always happened, isn't it likely that that will continue to happen? Well, it's not to say that your life hasn't produced some good result. You might get very mad at someone that told you that nothing that you've done so far has done you any good. That would be a really depressing thing to think. Even for myself, I'm 40 years old. I'd like to think I did some good sometime. But so far, we have not experienced enlightenment. We have not produced enlightenment by our activity. We do some things very well, and we do some things not so well. We do some things that produce happiness, and we do things that do not produce happiness. But we have not yet produced enlightenment. And so for that reason, we may find that we have to do something that is not ordinary for us, that is not normal for us. It is normal for us to continue as we are. Perhaps it is not so normal for us to engage in some kind of discipline, to engage in some kind of learning process, to engage in some sort of skillful practice of some kind to the degree that we produce change within ourselves. Our tendency would be to think that we could simply continue and somehow life would turn out all right. That's really the same as thinking that we could continue to watch an apple tree and just assume that eventually it will produce bananas. You will be watching that apple tree for a long time. And you may never get what you want. On the other hand, if we get a hold of ourselves and utilize what's in front of us, we may have some good result. If we engage in those activities that arise from the mind of the Buddha and are given to us by our teachers in a pure way and in a determined way, it is 100% certain that we will have the result that the Buddha had. What is this to do with devotion? First of all, in order to really understand the benefits of the teacher, we must understand the predicament that we're in. And that's a tough one for us. We have to understand the faults of cyclic existence. And that's really hard to do, because we like to satisfy ourselves. We're really all trying to be happy. We like to satisfy ourselves with thinking that eventually everything will turn out all right, and we like to satisfy ourselves with thinking that by the time we die, we've produced some good. And we really try to make ourselves happy thinking like that. That's our coping mechanism. But somehow, we have to face that even though we have done some good, we've also done some bad. Even though we have done some things intelligently, we've also been very stupid. Even though sometimes we have thought ahead and planned things out and been disciplined, other times we've been thoughtless and inefficient. And one thing we've all noticed is that just when we think we've got things handled, circumstances seem to rise up and change us, change everything around us, make it impossible to keep going in the way that we think we feel comfortable in. One thing that always is true is that everything changes. In understanding that that is the quality of cyclic existence, that it will always be so, that you can't predict when loved ones will die or when we ourselves will die, that you can't predict when sickness will make us incapable of doing the things that we like to do, that you can't predict when old age will really take a hold of us, that you can't predict when there will be some unfortunate circumstance. And you also can't predict happiness. You can't plan on it. Haven't you tried to do that? Haven't you said, well, I have this weekend off. I'm going to have a great weekend. I've been waiting for this weekend all week. And you think about this weekend and you think about this weekend, and then when it comes, it's gone and you didn't have much fun. Somehow you weren't in a good mood, or it just didn't work out, or you couldn't get it together, or it rained, or whatever. You can never plan on these things. Realizing that this is the situation of cyclic existence, we should be motivated then to try to seek out those causes which will produce consistent effect, which will produce ultimate effect. And we should use them. And we should think of the ultimate effect as being the effect which finally is predictable in its stability, in its sameness, in its complete absence of suffering, its complete lack of suffering. That result, which as a result of its lack of suffering, is blissful, stable, pure, and free. To produce that result, one cannot rely on chance, and most assuredly, one cannot rely on the ordinary things that are within cyclic existence. One must rely on a method that arises from that very state in order to be sure that it will produce that very state. And once one has considered these things, one should look for a real way to do this, not a theoretical way. It isn't enough only to think about this. One has to apply the causes. To do that, the first thing that one must do is to find a banquet at which to eat this teaching. In the same way that if you're hungry, the first thing to do is to find a place that sells food. Go to a restaurant. Doesn't help to sit around and look at pictures of food. Doesn't help to sit around and think about food. It helps to eat. So we must find a pure Dharma teacher. And when we find that perfect experience where it's a pure teacher, and the teacher is capable of giving all of the required kinds of teaching, and has themselves accomplished the teaching, and has themselves enacted that capacity, or has developed that capacity to offer the teaching in a totally skillful way, and with whom we feel comfortable and connected and natural with, whose teaching we can really hear and that touches our hearts. When we find that ultimate benefit, we should hold on to that as though we were gasping for our own breath. How precious is your breath? You want to know? Let all your breath out and don't breathe for a while. Find out what precious means. You've got to have it. You can't think of anything else. You're burning for it. Or starve yourself and see how necessary food becomes. Like that. In the same regard, you should make yourself understand how absolutely precious this opportunity is. And you should hold your teacher as your very breath, more important than your breath. Because having no more breath would do one thing. It would end this life, one life. But having no ability to practice Dharma, having no ability to produce the causes that produce the ultimate effect of enlightenment, absolutely ensures that not only in this lifetime, but in every lifetime in the future yet to come, we will revolve in this unpredictable state. So more than your breath, more than food, more than sleep, more than comfort, more than anything that you have ever experienced up until this time, the experience with one's teacher, the precious opportunity with one's teacher, should be held in a higher place. All of these things that I have named produce only benefit for now. How devoted do we get to food when we're really hungry? You've been really hungry, although here in America I'm not sure people really get really hungry. But you've had times when you've really been very busy and haven't had time to eat, and suddenly you're so hungry you could just eat anything. Anything looks good, that kind of hunger. Even things you don't like look delicious. People next to you, their arms look great. That kind of thing. You've been that hungry. If not, you should try it. Yet that kind of satisfaction that you have at that time, when you do get a meal, what does it produce? Produces relief until what time? Till the food is gone through you. And what does that food become that was so precious to you? You know what it's become. Do I have to say what? More of the same. It's not so with one's teacher. The practice that one does to purify the mind is a practice that reaps benefit from now until the ultimate goal is reached, pure enlightenment. The purification that one experiences when one practices and one engages in compassion is a continually building activity. It continues until the ultimate result is experienced. Once one achieves some result in one's Dharma practice, the result doesn't go away. The continuum of experience becomes purer, more subtle. The heavy grossness of compulsion and strong habitual tendency is lightened and becomes increasingly more so until enlightenment is reached, until one is able then to do something besides fixate on the ego. One is able then to experience the nature that is there, that is true, that is ever present. And all of this is a result of the transmission and the help, the milk, the nectar that is given to us by our teachers. Those of us that have practiced Dharma for some time, what did we do before we met with this opportunity? This shouldn't be hard for us to understand. What did we do? What result did we create? What were we revolving in? Going from one thing to another, trying to consume, trying to have, trying to be, producing only confusion. And then upon meeting with the path, finally began to have some real result. So we have to think of our teacher like that. When we have that opportunity, we should think how in the world we could take the best opportunity. How in the world can we make this a part of us? How in the world can we manage to really open our hearts? That's our job. How in the world can we think, can we listen so carefully? How can we practice so diligently? How can we do these things? How can we make the best use of it? In the same way that we delight to sit down to a meal when we're really hungry, and we think of the tastes that we're going to experience and think of the health that this meal is going to bring us, with that same delight, we should experience the relationship with our teacher. And we shouldn't back off from it. We should continue with courage and persevere. Very hard to understand how precious is this opportunity. Because we have such ordinary view, because we have such strong habitual tendencies, we see everything as being the same. So hard for us to see what's really precious. We continue to see what we continue to see, and we're almost mindless about it. In order to explain how this happens, I would like to borrow a line from a song that I used to play again and again and again because I loved it a long time ago. It's a song that was on an album by Art Garfunkel. Do you remember Simon and Garfunkel? Art Garfunkel made this album, and it was a song called Mary Was an Only Child. And there's one line that even now as I say it, it brings tears to my eyes because it reminds me of how we should think of our teachers. In this song it says, "And if you watch the stars at night and find them shining equally bright, you might have seen Jesus and not have known what you saw. Who would notice a gem in a 5 and dime store?" Our minds are like a 5 and dime store. And it's possible that we have looked upon the face of our own teachers and seen that experience as ordinary. Likely we have not understood. When our minds are like that, when they're occluded, when they're thick, when they're heavy with self-concern, we cannot see the diamond. We cannot recognize it as being essentially different from the rhinestone. So we have to practice in order to be able to do that. And be certain that we can purify our minds to take full opportunity. Why do we see our teacher as ordinary? Why do we not understand this great blessing? Why do we have the opportunity to eat at the banquet and then not practice? Why do we miss the point? Why do we have the Buddhist teachings in front of us and still continue trying to make our lives happy in ordinary ways, producing more confusion? We are fixated on our own egos, believing them to be solid and real. This fixation is so intense and has occurred since time out of mind to the degree that it has become not only habitual tendency, but compulsion. It is the same tendency that causes us to fixate on our ego and therefore never taste our own true nature that causes us to see our teachers as ordinary people. To the degree that we cannot see our own Buddha nature, we cannot understand the nature of our teachers, cannot see that they are actually extensions of Lord Buddha's miraculous compassion, cannot understand the preciousness and uniqueness of this opportunity. To the degree that we are unknowing of our own primordial wisdom nature, to that degree we are incapable of taking advantage of the opportunity to practice. It is the same fault of ours that makes us believe that this ego is what we are. The same one that looks at this and says, this is all there is. This is what I see and I believe in, and what I act in accordance with. It is the same part of us that does this, the same fixation that causes us to look at the teacher and the teaching and the concept of having the ultimate result and say, so what? The same. What should we do then? We should get a hold of ourselves. We should allow ourselves to understand that we don't have the whole picture. We perceive now according to the five senses, and believe me, those five senses, don't believe me, believe the Buddha. Those five senses are an extension of our ego. Only that. And yet the Buddha is able to perceive with pristine cognition, free of any kind of contrivance, simple awareness, natural awareness, and complete omniscience of all cause and effect relationships. Perhaps then we should get a hold of ourselves. And instead of thinking that our own confused perceptions are intelligent and allowing them to continue without any argument and simply relying on them to help us continue an ordinary experience, apply ourselves diligently to the first, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, then the fifth teaching that we can receive from our teacher, which comes directly from the Buddha, until we are able to perceive more clearly, and then ultimately until we produce the ultimate result. The point I'm trying to make is that we must take the first step. And we should take that first step with confidence and diligence and courage. And that courage means that it may not feel natural to us. It may be a real departure from our ordinary experience. But it would have to be to produce the extraordinary result. If all we want to do is stay within our comfort zone and continue to have our ordinary experience, what will that produce? And that is the point that I'm trying to make today. Courage. Courage to change. Courage to be different from what we were before. Courage to rely on something other than our own confusion. This is the method that we must apply with diligence. And in order to do that, we must rely on our teachers. If they have within their hands the path, and through their kindness are willing to give us the path that has always produced, when practiced correctly, the ultimate result of liberation, we have the responsibility of developing the courage to accept that gift. And not only to accept it, to run toward it, to reach for it, to yearn for it, and to increase our yearning and our reaching every moment. So I hope that this will somehow be helpful to you, certainly in encouraging you, if you are already a Dharma practitioner, in encouraging you not to be complacent about your level of practice. And I don't mean that if you're practicing 2 hours a day, you should now increase to 3 hours a day, although that would be great. I think you should do that if you can. I don't mean it necessarily that much, but sometimes we have to understand that there are ways in which we practice. We can practice many hours a day and yet not be practicing in our hearts, not be practicing deeply. We have to require more of ourselves. It has to be a continual level of mindfulness, attentiveness, devotion, and concern, and courage. Even within our 3 hours practice, we're likely to let our minds wander and forget why we're practicing in the first place. It's that kind of inner stability that we must require of ourselves, and I hope that this encourages you to do so, and especially within the practice of Guru Yoga. For those of us that are thinking about practicing the Buddha's teaching, or thinking about practicing some meditation, or practice a little of this and a little bit of that, I hope that this is helpful too, especially in regard to the information that I've given you about cause and effect relationships and about what you're likely to produce with questionable causes. Remember that you will produce exactly according to the cause that you institute within your own mind. And those causes which arise from enlightenment will produce enlightenment. So hopefully this will encourage you to question further, to see for yourself whether you are not finished with the cycle of death and rebirth and wishing very much to go on to liberation. Whether or not you yourself can't look around the world and see if hasn't there been enough suffering? Hasn't there simply been enough? And maybe in that regard can produce in yourself the courage to go on in an exacting, disciplined, and courageous way. So I hope that this will be of help to you in crossing those lines and in continuing with faith. Nanda, Nanda.